Senator Renuka Sagramsingh-Sooklal.
Mr. Vice President, I thank you for the opportunity to join in this debate. Coming at this stage in the batting order, Mr. Vice President, my contribution in this debate is not going to be very long, but I believe it was critical to, of course, rise to the occasion, having the opportunity to speak, to, of course, again, to jump into this debate, to try to debunk some of the misinformation and the propaganda that the opposition in this place is known for. Mr. Vice President, I am not surprised at all by the misconception of the members of the opposition. Sometimes I often think, Mr. Vice President, that is what they do best. You know, I want to remind this country and this Honourable Senate, Mr. Vice President, that amnesty periods in this regard, it is not an entirely new concept at all. As a matter of fact, Mr. Vice President, the government of 2010 to 2015 brought an amendment under Act Number 2 of 2012, a finance bill which sought to amend the same Section 39C1 to cater for outstanding contributions, which would have become due and payable, Mr. Vice President, until October 9th, 2011, as the amnesty period was from the 10th of October 2011. Now, Mr. Vice President, in listening to the contribution of the other side, I had the benefit of pulling some Hansard records of the House of Representatives. And for the purpose of this Hansard, Mr. Vice President, Madam President, it was the House of Representatives debate dated the 8th of February, 2012, at page 471. The former Minister of Finance, Mr. Vice President, in his piloting of the Finance Act Number 2 of 2012, explained a similar amendment to Section 39C subsection 1. The Hansard at page 471 of that debate, Mr. Vice President, which took place, as I said before, on the 8th of February, stated, the then Minister of Finance stated, the NIS waiver we expect would indeed increase the revenue base of the National Insurance Board and also allow individuals to put their books in order. All outstanding contributions payable by the employer to the board must be paid before the expiry date of June 30th, 2012. So there is a sunset clause. The waiver shall only be available to employers who are registered with the board before October 10th, 2011, in respect of penalty, interest, and contributions for the insured person registered as their employees prior to October 10, 2010. The waiver only applies to penalty and interest payments which accrued before October 10, 2010. So this is another attempt to provide an incentive for those who have, for one reason or the other, not paid up their NIS contribution to do so and get their books in order. End quote, taken from an Hansard of a 2010 government. And I need not remind this country who was in power, Mr. Vice President, at that point in time. So it begs the question, Madam President, it begs the question, if members of the side opposite even understand the concept of a sunset clause, when this amendment that we have brought, this amendment is clear as to when the amnesty period would end. I want to respectfully submit to this Honourable Senate who stands to benefit from this amendment. Madam President, Senator Mark, throughout his contribution, throughout the length and breadth of his contribution, would have insinuated that only a particular group stands to benefit from this amnesty. Madam President, I want to take this opportunity to indicate, as we are all aware, that this government is an all-encompassing government, and the purpose, as was already mentioned, is for the benefit of all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to fulfill their now statutory obligations. So, of course, for Senator Mark to come and then promote the idea that this amendment, of course, is for a particular group or potential PNM financiers and friends and family, I think that's how they constantly put it to the population. It is absurd. Because once we have this amnesty, we are going to have SMEs who are going to benefit. Once we have this amnesty, we are giving an opportunity to every single class of citizens in this country to put their house in order. And that is simply what we are here to do. Madam President, the past is evidence that amnesty periods benefit both citizens and the government. As citizens, Madam President, is given an opportunity to once again be on the right side of the law, while the government would benefit from monies that was once due and owing to the state, so that the obligation of the state, Madam President, can be met. And mind you, when I speak of the government benefiting, I'm not speaking about government benefiting and money hitting our pockets, you know. I'm talking about the government is able to accrue sums, of course, that could then be reinvested into other areas of development, Madam President, in this country. So that is just one of the major things that I wanted. Having looked at the Hansard, having seen a UNC Minister of Finance brought a similar provision in the past, in which the UNC supported, and now have the gall to come here today and criticize this government for trying to implement something that was similar. Madam President, as I promised, I would not be long, but I want to briefly look at Clause 5, proposed Section 63(1) of the bill, of the National Insurance Bill Act. Now, Madam President, Clause 5, proposed Section 631 states, any person who, for the purpose of obtaining any benefit or other payment under this Act, whether for himself or some other person, or for any other purpose connected with this Act, A, knowingly makes any false statement or false representation, or B, produces or furnishes or causes or knowingly allowed to be produced or furnished any document or information, and of course the clause goes on. So that is my focus now would be on Clause 5, paying specific attention to subsection A and B. Now, Madam President, I am of the opinion, and the government is of the opinion, that NIBTT has been continuously improving its services and operations in meeting the needs, Madam President, of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And the purpose of doing this, Madam President, is to add a further layer of protection to persons. And when I speak about that, I'm talking about what we hope to achieve, Madam President, in the amendment that Clause 5 now brings. Our intention in the amendment that Clause 5 brings, Madam President, is my respectful submission, is also to address and bolster the national insurance system and legislation. And thirdly, this amendment brought in Clause 5, Madam President, I respectfully submit, is also to provide a critical tool to law enforcement in relation to the national insurance provision. Now, in looking at this particular amendment, it is very, very important, Madam President, for me to respectfully take the Senate to Section 3, subsection 1 of the Forgery Act of Trinidad and Tobago, Chapter 1113. Now, Clause 5, proposed Section 631 of this bill, deals with fraud and forgery of documents and the production of false information. So I believe for us to also get a greater understanding of this clause, it would also be critical for us to bear in mind the Forgery Act. Now, Madam President, under Section 3, subsection 1 of the Forgery Act, forgery is defined as the making of false documents in order that it may be used as genuine. The section goes on to say that forgery with the intent to defraud or deceive. And then, of course, in that particular bill, in that particular act, there is then Section 3.2 that goes on into detail about persons and the criteria that the court will have to satisfy satisfy for someone to be deemed as guilty of committing this offense. Now, Madam President, this means that, pursuant to the Forgery Act, what this means is that a document is false where there is any material alteration, whether by addition, or erasure or removal. What it also means is that the whole or some material, part of its purports to be made by or on behalf, is fictitious or probably of a deceased person. That particular section of the Forgery Act is also said it's made in the name of an existing person, or it is made by him or by his authority with the intention that it should pass as having been made by some person, real or fictitious, other than the person who made or authorized it. Now, let us look at what I know. So that's what the Forgery Act speaks to, and it's that area, that piece of legislation that deals with a similar offense that is now created in this particular amendment. What I now want to look at, having put on the record what the Forgery Act states, I want to look at the consistency, Madam President, that exists in national insurance in this bill with the Forgery Act. Madam President, Clause 5, proposed Section 631 of the bill, a person who is found guilty is liable on summary conviction, and Section 17 Section 17 subsection 2 of the Forgery Act states, Madam President, that where an offense against this act is by any other act, whether past or after the commencement of this act, made punishable on summary conviction, proceedings may be taken either under such other acts or under this act. The point that I want to make, Madam President, is that the Forgery Act seeks to allow a person to be held liable for acts of fraud and forgery, which is punishable by summary conviction. So therefore, the fraudsters and smart men can be dealt with under that Forgery Act. What we have done in this amendment is very similar to what we have already, what is currently present, or how fraud is dealt with under the Forgery Act. So the reason why, Madam President, I just wanted to bring to the attention of this Honorable Senate the Forgery Act is so that we can understand that the amendments that we have brought today is also in alignment with other existing law as it relates to the treatment of fraud. And by applying what we have done, or by making the amendments which we have made to this particular act by virtue of the bill that we are debating, is consistent with the Forgery Act. So we have not departed significantly. We have not departed from how this offense is treated in other pieces of law. Now, it is critical. I know Senator Vieira, and that has always been my concern. I know Senator Vieira, and I don't want to misquote the Honorable Senator, but I believe he asked a question about, or he made a statement relative to the importance of enforcing the law, right? Yes, we have increased penalties, and yes, critical is how is this going to be enforced. Now, when I was looking at this bill and looking at the act in its entirety, of course, the point of enforcement came to me, and I reminded myself, Madam President, of the department responsible for fraud under the NIBTT. Madam President, it would be remiss of me if I don't make mention in speaking of the enforcement of whatever amendments we have brought to this bill. It would be remiss of me if I don't mention the Investigation and Controls Department within NIBTT. And it is this department, Madam President, which is responsible for investigating and reporting of fraudulent activities within the National Insurance Board. So in essence, the amendment, my respectful submission, is that what we have done is simply given greater teeth to this investigation body, who, of course, when I say greater teeth, of course, this body, sorry, is going to be responsible, of course, for using the law that is now in existence, for accruing all of the evidence and all of the information that is necessary to ensure that there is successful enforcement of the new provisions or the amendments that we have brought to the law. Now, the main objective, so like the Honourable Senator, being concerned about enforcement, it took me, again, as I said before, to looking in detail at this investigation and controls department. And even within the Act, it's clear what their roles and their main objectives and their functions are. So this investigation and controls department, Madam President, just for the record, the main objective of this department are to execute the day-to-day operational activities in support of the fraud control framework, 1. 2, to support the organizational efforts to ensure compliance to fraud and all related policies. And 3, implement preventative, detective, and response procedures that will manage fraud. So by looking to answer my own concerns, when I asked the question, okay, how is this? How are we? What mechanisms are in place to ensure that all of these amendments we are able to enforce it and really catch those fraudsters? I want to believe my respectful submission is that we have within NIBTT, Madam President, the Investigative and Controls Department, and I've already listed what are their core and critical functions. In essence, what this department will be doing is serving a function by assisting in the collection of evidence that may exist within NIBTT that, of course, can assist in the enforcement and, of course, bringing to justice persons who are guilty of offenses committed under this Act. Madam President, by carrying out these objectives, the objectives that I respectfully submitted above, the Investigations and Control Department of NIB has a mandate, and I want to repeat that, has a mandate to collaborate with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Board of Inland Revenue, and the Ministry of Legal Affairs as necessary to report and or to provide support in the prosecution of fraud matters encountered during their day-to-day operations, thereby embodying an ethical culture with zero tolerance to fraud. And I was very, very much interested. I mean, not being a mathematician and not being very much into the finance world. I shouldn't say a mathematician, but not being very, very much in tune with the finance world. I really had to find myself reading to fully understand how the NIBTT operated. And I have to reiterate that I was pleased as a citizen, not as a minister of government, not as a member of the government, but just as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, to know that this investigation and control department that exists within the NIBTT is responsible and will be responsible for assisting all of the key players, whether it's the Office of the Attorney General, whether it is the TTPS, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and more so the Board of Inland Revenue. This body is responsible for working with these entities in order for us to treat with the issue of fraud that may exist within the National Insurance. NIB. Now, Madam President, to that end, with this amendment, I want to reiterate that the government, as a government, we are remaining committed to taking a zero tolerance approach to fraud. With this being said, we are placing stiffer penalties, Madam President, for acts of false information where persons try to obtain benefits or other payments under this Act, whether for himself or for some other person. Madam President, we are therefore making these amendments, and I want to say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we are making these amendments for the benefit of all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, for all of our people. And we are taking a hands-on approach and a no-nonsense approach, Madam President, in trying to deal with fraud as it exists and instances of fraud as it may come to the fore. So this is really the crux of my contribution, my very, very short contribution to this debate, Madam President, where I just wanted to remind the public who, like the Honourable Senator Vera, and even like myself, who may have been concerned about the enforcement enforcement processes. I wish to say that within the ambit of the Act itself, there is this investigative body that is now charged and has a mandate to work with some of the key players who are, of course, responsible for the for the investigation and more so the prosecution of fraud as it exists. Madam President, with those few words, I thank you.
Acting Prime Minister.